It's funny listening to Grace. She's not the first miss of something to be in nuclear. Miss Washington, D.C. was actually at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, so a trailblazer in her own right, and sort of represents the youth movement you've seen going on in nuclear over the last several years. I myself come from a background of independent power development, so coal plants, gas plants for about 15 years. And in 2007, I came into nuclear. And at that time, I was 49 years old, and I was affectionately referred to as the young fella. So that just tells you what has changed in that time frame, where now we have folks like Grace, Maria Korsnick, we have a whole number of people, mothers from nuclear, actively involved in the nuclear industry trying to bring this forward. And they're doing it because of a number of reasons. But fundamentally, for me, what it comes down to is, frankly, we just need energy to have the life that we all enjoy. And we're blessed in this country by having large amounts of relatively cheap energy, whether it's wind, solar, coal, uranium, natural gas, hydro. It's all relatively cheap. But you go anyplace else, it is not so cheap. They're paying 3, 4, 5, 10 times what we pay in this country for things like electricity. So while it's important and we keep an eye and put things in the context of the United States, whatever we see going on here, keep in mind that energy use generally follows population. And the United States is only, as I last checked, about 5% of the world's population. So anything we talk about going on here in this country is 20x globally. And lots of places in the world, they're not even starting at where we are. They're starting with a deficit of maybe being zero. About 1 billion people do not have access to electricity. Billions more don't have adequate electricity. So all those things drive to the need for electricity, for energy, for all the things that we see and aspire to in terms of what it means to have a modern, productive lifestyle. So let's go back to really what I'm here to talk about a little bit. My view from having been involved in nuclear now for 16 years, but most recently as the chief financial officer for NuScale Power in small modular reactors. And I started with that company back in 2011, having been at a company that was looking at large light water reactors. And that company basically was called Unistar, and it was pursuing a large light water reactor design put forward first by the French, and was moving along fairly well. We called it the Renaissance back then. And fortunately, once you name something, it means it will surely die if you're in nuclear. And that, in fact, happened when we had Fukushima take place. When Fukushima took place, now, I'm not a nuclear engineer. I'm an electrical engineer, so it's not one of the majors that Grace spoke so well about, but, I did that for a while. I turned to my chief nuclear officer and I said, what does Fukushima mean for our design? And he goes, Chris, the lesson to Fukushima is if you rely upon energy for your safety systems and you lose your emergency diesel generators, you lose the connection to the grid, you have a problem. And the design that we have, that we're pursuing at Unistar, is the most electricity-dependent safety design in the world, bar none. And needless to say, that design has only been built in 4 places, no more being built, and I moved on to more greener pastures with small modular reactors. We moved on to it because it had the ability to passively cool and shut down without any need for energy. And that's typical for the whole genre of advanced reactors that we're seeing come through now in terms of their safety case, that they can withstand things like a Fukushima and be able to ride through it without an issue. And because of those events, what we're seeing is that the demand for these things is absolutely huge. In a recent report by the U.S. Department of Energy, and these folks, Department of Energy, oil, gas, coal, wind, solar, hydro, and nuclear, they don't have any particular bone to pick of supporting one over the other. But what they say is that if you want to have a transition to a decarbonized electricity system that is both affordable and keeps the lights on reliably, we need to have about 200 gigawatts of new nuclear come online by 2040. Right now in the U.S., that 20% we talked about earlier, that's only 100 gigawatts. So we're looking to go to 3x in terms of that. Right now, that 200 gigawatts uses maybe 20,000 tons of uranium metal per year. That's going to have to triple. Right now, we don't produce maybe a couple thousand tons per year, mostly from you guys. Transitioning. So the need for it is absolutely huge. And people are getting into it. In fact, Blanding, Utah. Blanding is part of the Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems. They're participating in the first carbon-free power project. The plant that was built in Idaho, at Idaho Falls National Laboratory, providing power here. And, what I'll tell you is, they started that back really in 2007, a journey of saying, there's coal, there's gas, there's wind, there's solar, there's hydro. They have all of it as UAMPS, Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems, but they need to have something that keeps it balanced, keeps the lights on, affordable, and reliable and predictable. Because you know what? Natural gas is cheap. But then when it's not cheap, it's a real problem. And it's not usually a problem of the making of the folks here in Utah. It's usually a problem of the making of the folks in California, Texas, sometimes up in Canada. And then you find yourselves paying what was maybe $60 per megawatt for electricity, $120, $200, $300 per megawatt hour. Now, uranium is a volatile commodity, just like any commodity. But the trick is, in a levelized cost of electricity calculation, it's a very small portion. So in fact, if you look at an overall cost of electricity of, say, maybe, I'll just throw a rough number out there, $80 per megawatt hour, maybe $10 of that is fuel for a nuclear plant. And only half of that is the U308. So even if that doubles or triples, it doesn't bring you to a place that you feel in the same place of being with gas where, the price goes from 80 to 90. Don't like it, but manageable. Gas goes in the same way. You go from 60 to 200. Not manageable for many people. So in terms of reliable, affordable source of energy, it's incredible. And the other attribute of it that people really overlook is that it's storable. The energy density of nuclear fuel is tremendous. Now, we heard people talking about the challenges with Russia and other places. And, I'll tell you that we got phone calls after the Ukraine invasion saying, okay, look, what are you guys going to do for nuclear fuel? And so we said, good question, let's call up and ask people. And we called up and asked the people who were making our fuel. And the basic answer was, well, when do you need it? 2029. Come back in 2024, 2025. That's when you have the contract for it, and we can put it in supply to meet your demand. And by the way, if you're worried about it, you actually have a whole bunch sitting out the back that you can just buy now. Now, that changed in 2022 because what you saw at that time was all the large utilities, so Southern, Duke, Dominion, TVA, Constellation, all the large nuclear plant operators went and contracted long. But they're contracted out for 4 or 5 years, which is a good thing, because it provides the demand signal that is needed by folks like Energy Fuels and provides really the need for folks to have that investment. And that's what come back to my maybe last point before I turn over to questions. And how am I doing for time here? Okay. Is that one of the privileges I had with NuScale is that we were a university spin-out. It's a technology company making small modular reactors. And we got to the point where we became public by way of a reverse merger with a special purpose acquisition company, or SPAC, back in 2022. And as part of that effort, I had the opportunity to have literally hundreds of meetings with investors out there. Hundreds. Multiple meetings. And I will tell you, there are trillions of dollars looking to get into this space. And there are very few opportunities to get into it from a public company standpoint. The fact that these folks are here and available, I think it's going to be gangbusters. There are others looking to come in. But what I find when I talk to those folks in New York or other areas where, London, they all sit there and they say, well, the public's not going to take that. And what I tell them, and I think there's one fellow here that's on the sell side, from the research side, He said they need to get out of their offices of New York City or Washington, D.C. or London, England, and come talk to folks like here in Blanding who are supporting the first new nuclear SMR project in the country and say, why are you doing it? And then take from that, yeah, maybe you're not going to build it in the borough neighborhood of Queens, but you are going to build them up in upstate New York. You are going to build them in Wyoming. You should be building them here in Utah. There are literally 200 coal plants that are just, folks, they're old. They're old. And the question is, do you replace it with a light, which you could do, or do you replace it with something like a nuclear plant, which employs more workers per megawatt capacity, pays them more on average, has lower radiation exposure for them, because what people realized earlier is that pretty much everything that comes out of the ground has some radiation to it, and coal ash particularly so. And then finally, for those communities that have hosted those energy facilities, most of them are in rural areas. And we've been out to those places, and I've seen them. And if you go there and say, look, we're going to shut down your coal plant, and they say, well, you might as well just shut down the plant. And I say, well, guess what? I'll give your guys a bunch of squeegees and newspapers, and you can put it in a solar farm. Well, like, how many jobs is that? I said, well, you have 200 now, we might need 6 or 8 for that. Like, you still have to shut down the town. So there's lots of good reasons why I see there being a demand for what Energy Fuels is going, and for nuclear generally in the United States. And in some ways, these guys have both sides of the bet, right? So people are going to decarbonize. We can do it all with renewables and batteries. That's the rare earth guys. You need to have nuclear. That's the SMRs and the things that I came from. We've always believed that you need to have both. And in the both situation, folks like Energy Fuels are going to do very well. And the ability to be able to do it here in Blanding, Utah, phenomenal. Hats off to you guys for making it through some tough times, because I knew what it was like in nuclear in tough times. So you guys have done phenomenally well. So with that, I'll end my remarks. Happy to take any questions about anything. Because I pretend to be a autodidact and can answer any question, however unqualified I am in that regard. So please feel free to fire away. Except for you, you can't ask a question. You work for Energy Fuels. No, go ahead. Uh-oh, board member. So the question was, how is a plant in Wyoming doing that Bill Gates is involved in? So first, little note, I actually visited Naughton, that plant, Kimmer, Wyoming, back in 2018. And I was trying to get them to say, you guys need to be converting this over to a small modular reactor plant. So the fact that the home of J.C. Penney is now pursuing that plant at that location, I think it's great. They have, commitments from the U.S. government for about $1.6 billion to help make that happen. Their big challenge is that they rely upon a fuel that's called high-assay, low-enriched uranium. And so while, this stuff is there and it's doable, there's nothing rocket science about that, the high-assay part is the part that's being challenging for those folks. So they moved their commercial operation date from originally 2028 to now, I think, 2030. But that's sort of what they're doing, and my understanding is that they're still, I know the folks over at TerraPower, and they're still moving forward.
What?
Yeah, so for all the folks, NuScale's looking at 2029 for their first module and a 6-module plant operating in Idaho. X-Energy, who's a third recipient from the U.S. Department of Energy, and so people taking note about, is there U.S. government support? There's absolutely U.S. government support for this. They're looking to be operational originally as 2028 up in the Pacific Northwest at the Columbia Generating Station site. Now they're looking to provide steam and electricity to a Dow chemical plant in Texas, which is one of the beautiful things about nuclear plants, is that you can get both the steam and electricity. Because if you look at where carbon emissions come from, about a third is from electricity generation, 1/3 is from transportation, and 1/3 is from industrial processes. Being able to decarbonize those industrial processes is pretty large part of the pie you have to get after. And Dow would be, to my knowledge, one of the first ones to be going down that path. Any other questions?
Let's talk about the fuel side. But sure, NuScale doesn't retain, right? What about the fuel side? Just talk about.
Yeah, so the fuel for a NuScale reactor, it's a low-enriched uranium, or low-assay, low-enriched uranium. It's the same fuel that's being used in most of the reactors in the United States. It's a pressurized water reactor. It's using the same fuel type in terms of enrichment, so less than 5%. We use like 3 to 4%. And it's in a fuel form of a 17 by 17 fuel assembly, which is currently manufactured by a number of folks. And, the notion that NuScale had in going with that fuel type and technology was that it was well-known and well-established supply chains for it. So there wasn't a need to have that chicken, I don't know if the chicken and egg, but having a demand problem of saying, hey, I'm going to do a high-assay, low-enriched uranium. You need to build a conversion and an enrichment facility to supply me. Trust me, demand will be there. They're just taking what's already out there and available. And it was mentioned earlier, there was a large amount of capacity or demand that went away with Fukushima. Now, interestingly, Grace mentioned that in the United States that the acceptance of nuclear is, it's actually been above 60% for quite some time. And interestingly, if you have folks that live at a nuclear plant in the area, it's generally much higher. Exceptions would be Vermont Yankee and plant up in, where was it? Outside of Manhattan. But other than that, generally people like it because they're a great provider of jobs, provider of tax base, stability, everything else that goes with it. But in Japan, they're actually back over 50% support for new nuclear. So even in those countries where people were sort of against it, they're changing over. And, lo and behold, Germany is re-entering the discussion. I mean, Germany has spent, I don't know, $1 trillion in Energiewende, and they have increased their carbon footprint over the last 20 years. The United States, arguably had, at least the federal level, no demonstrable energy policy, and we've decarbonized more. Now, a lot of that's due because of the switch to gas. But, it just kind of shows you that, centrally planned ideas have a tendency of going awry in terms of what their intended outcome are. And the Germans are now actually re-entering that discussion about nuclear even there. You got a question?
Reload cycle.
Okay. So reload cycle for nuclear. So typically a plant is with 3 to 5% fuel is going to be somewhere around 18 to 24 months. And what the designs that what the small reactors are doing, and even all the advanced reactors, is to reduce the complexity of the plants, move the fabrication of those plants from a construction site to a factory or a fabrication yard where it's much cheaper, and make it easier to refuel them. So it might take 21 days or 30 days for a large reactor refueling. A NuScale plant will do in 10 days. And that's just extra megawatt hours you have to provide on the grid. So if you look at the typical large, best run plants in the United States today operate about 92% availability. A NuScale plant will be about 95% availability because shorter refueling timeline, and because there's less stuff to break that you have to fix and takes the plant down through their operation. So a whole number of reasons why you see that new technology being an advancement, not only in safety, but also in cost and efficiency over the existing plants, which is what you would expect. So the way I liken to it is that the submarine reactors are Ferrari race car engines, high performance, high octane fuel, very expensive. NuScale reactors are Honda Civic engines that will get 1 million miles. You don't have to worry about it very much. Uses, 87 octane, widely available. So, all the same kind of thing, right? I mean, if you look at the Ferrari race car engines, they're a V6 engine. but much modified, high performance, and you see those kind of, breaking down, blowing up, everything else because of the performance demanded of them. Now, the Navy ships are incredibly robust. I mean, they don't have any issues in the nuclear fleet, and that's really been a benefit to the commercial fleet because all the folks that work mostly in the plants historically have come out of the nuclear program, out of the Navy. It's only recently that we're seeing a lot of folks coming out of just grad programs, undergrad programs like Grace, but I can point to NuScale when I left, about 40% of the people were under 40 years old. And about 25% of the skilled folks were women. So we had a nuclear core designer, head of the core design team, as a woman heading up the probabilistic risk assessment, a woman. So a lot of diversity coming in there because people see this as being the future and they want to be part of it. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. I think we got a